Welcome back to What Matters This Week. I'm Lauren Maloney. Mayor Miro Weinberger from Burlington here again joining us for May. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you, Lauren. Thanks for having us in again.
Yes. A lot to talk about, but first, what has made news this week and the past few weeks. Use of force when it comes to Burlington police. A couple weeks ago, there were those federal lawsuits filed from two men. You know, you admitted these have been challenging few weeks. What have you heard from the community when it comes to this?
Well, clearly these incidents have gotten the attention of the public, and no one likes looking at those videos. I certainly understand why people are angry and upset, and I think there needs to be some kind of reaction. I think the community is focused on policing like this, I think it is a moment we can actually move forward as a community, and I think by engaging the police department, having a really thoughtful public engagement process, we can make some further improvements on some policies. I think we have some issues with the way we release information that contributed to the anger here. I think we need to kind of codify some of the ways in which those public disclosures get made. I think we could bring the community into our use of force policy. I think we have in many ways a good modern use of force policy, but it is not one that has been the product of a broad community discussion. I think it might benefit from that. I think officer wellness and the way in which we train our officers are also issues that would benefit from emerging from this period with community discussion and examination.
I imagine you saw the videos that we have. What was the first thing that went through your mind when you watched them?
Yes, I've seen the videos. My first thought was this is not great. This is troubling. At the same time, I think when you're in the mayor's position, when you work with the police every day, you understand the challenging conditions that our police department is under, the fact that they are encountering members of the public about 30,000 times over the course of the year. Many of these exchanges, interactions are late at night in situations where there's a lot of alcohol and where there's large crowds. And I think understanding that broader context is important to, I think it would be unreasonable to think that you're never going to have anything go wrong. There's never going to be some kind of incident. I think the real measure of a police department is what happens in response to that. And I think here, these were issues that we're aware of because we have body cam policy so that there is accountability for officers. We have a citizen oversight process where various members of the community advised the chief before he imposed discipline. In one of the cases, he did impose serious discipline. For a variety of reasons, they chose not to in the other case. I think as we spend a little more time on this and come to understand what happened here and have some further conversation for it, I hope what will emerge is a greater understanding for the conditions our officers work under and an understanding that we have a good system for accountability here that I think in this case, basically there's a lot of, maybe we're going to, through discussion, find some things that we wish we had done a little bit differently. I do think, again, disclosure policies could help. But I also think a lot of things happen the way they're supposed to here, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Some of the concerns or feedback you have heard, whether it's via email or talking to people, do they have to do with the chief? Do people want to talk about Chief Del Pozo's leadership?
Most of the reactions I get about the Chief Del Pozo from the Burlington public is a great deal of gratitude that we have, that he has decided to be a chief in this community. I think there is broad recognition that he is a pretty unusual individual in American law enforcement. He's someone with a military background, spent many years on the street, really, is a cop's cop in a lot of ways, and at the same time he has really a broad background, remarkable education, and I think really understands the values of the Burlington community and what those values, what the implications are for policing. I think he's been one of the most progressive police chiefs in the country. He's literally been won national awards for his work, and I think we're very fortunate to have him here, and I think most people recognize that even in challenging times like we're in right now.
There's a long way to go when addressing this. Do you think, I know you outlined some principles at the city council meeting on Monday night. Are we just at the beginning of what could be, you know, a series of public forums, et cetera, on this?
I think so. That's the way I hope it goes. I think you know, a benefit that can come out of a moment like this is, I think we have the focus of the community. I think this is a time where we really should have a discussion about what the future of policing looks like in Burlington. And I think if you look around the country, communities that have done that, communities that have included the police in that discussion in a very intentional way, communities that have brought in experts that know how to lead a discussion like this, have really seen some positive results flow from that in terms of public safety and in terms of I think the kind of morale in which the police department feels about their job and the way the community trusts their department. So, you know, I don't think this is something that should go on for years and years, but I think we could, over a period of months, create a good process and have some very positive benefits that could flow from handling this situation in a proactive, forward-looking, you know, kind of building way, and I hope that's what emerges. It could go the other way. I think there's some risk this could become divisive and controversial. I hope that doesn't happen, because I think we all have a similar goal here. I think there's a pretty broad consensus about where we want our police department to go, and I think we can get there if this doesn't become kind of a partisan negative issue.
Okay, appreciate you addressing that. By the way, the Housing Summit is coming up.
Yes.
Now June 11th, something you talked about in the State of the City. What are you looking forward to? What can people expect?
I am looking forward to this event. Yes, June 11th, it's going to be kind of an all-day event. We're going to have, there's going to be a workshop, including some keynote speeches from noon until 5.
Is this at Contoy's?
It is going to be right there in Contoy's Auditorium. We maybe use Burlington City Arts for some of it as well, depending on how many people show up. We are encouraging people to pre-register. It's a free event, of course, but we are asking people to register online so we can get a sense for how many people are coming. So far, we've had a pretty big response to this. I think we will have you know, a lot of people there. And then there's going to be an evening session as well. There's going to be more kind of a town meeting style where we'll kind of read out some of the results of the workshops over the course of the day and have, again, hear from these keynote speakers. Here's why I think this is important, Lauren. You know, I think the lack of supply of housing in Burlington and Chittenden County more broadly is at the heart of almost all of our social, economic, and even environmental issues. I mean, really, take your pick. If you care about job creation and business growth here in Chittenden County, you hear again from our businesses again and again that their biggest obstacle to growth is being able to retain and secure new employees.
So their employees can afford to live here.
Exactly. If you're worried about homelessness, obviously there's a huge nexus between people being on the street and the lack of housing supply. If you care about equity, you know, President Obama came out with a report right at the end of his administration that said one of the top drivers in income inequality in our country is the lack of, is basically local zoning rules that get in the way of housing creation and that are driving inequality in this country, keeping people from moving to where opportunity is. And I think we are making progress on this issue, and I hope people understand that. I think that's actually, it's an emerging story, is that we have succeeded as both a city and as a county of changing the direction and actually creating hundreds of new homes in Burlington over the last 7 years, about 600 new homes versus only a little more than 60 in a comparable period before we started this focus. And there's similar numbers countywide. But I think we have more work to do if we want these trends to continue. We have parking policies that I think get in the way of housing creation and make the cost of housing too high. We we could create a lot of additional cottages and smaller homes that would be consistent with our single-family neighborhoods but are not legal. You just can't build them because of the regulations today. We could create a lot of new homes that way in a way that I don't think that would create considerable new housing opportunities.
Is there interest in that?
Yeah, there is. This is this idea of an accessory dwelling unit is something.
I had never heard of it.
You know, this is actually state law. This is an interesting thing. Like, there's a state law that says accessory dwelling units are supposed to be legal everywhere in Vermont.
Okay.
But very few of them get built in most Vermont cities because there's so many ways that regulation can result in a no. Basically, our parking requirements make it very hard for someone to build a little cottage in their backyard. There's, I think, really little to no negative impacts of allowing that. They allow people to stay in their homes and generate some income or have a place for an elderly loved one to reside on the community. So, I think the housing crisis that we are no doubt in and that much of the country in is, I think, in large part a crisis that we can solve by getting our local land use rules right, and they're not all right today. And this summit is going to move us forward, and it's supposed to be a very action-oriented summit where we're going to come out of this with an action list of 5 or 6 items that we are going to work on with the public over the course of the summer, and in the fall we're going to hand off to the City Council and the Planning Commission a new set of rules or ordinances for them to act on and go through the formal vetting process as soon as this fall. So this is something I'm excited about. I really think it's quite important. We're making progress, but we haven't finished the job. This summit is a step towards finishing the job. Something that you and I can talk about then next month. We're going to be talking about this a lot over the next year. You know, I talked about it a lot in my State of the City address. It's again, I just think this is at the core of so many issues, including government, the cost of government issues. If we can create new homes, that's a great way to build the tax base and spread the cost of government out over a much broader number of people. Almost any issue you pick, I can tell you why more housing is at the core of the solution. Mayor, appreciate you being here. Thank you. Lauren, it's always great to see you. Thanks for having us. We'll be right back on What Matters This Week.